because your story is kind of interesting. Taking some big chances early on in your life. I mean, you look like a young guy as it is, but starting
It's the baby face.
yeah, starting at 19, you took some big chances. So, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in Canada or did you grow up overseas? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Canada, so
Okay.
I was born in Hong Kong, moved here when I was 6. So we're an immigrant family. Learned to speak English here, and we're I guess like just put this way is like we're a solid middle class family, right? We're not coming from a particular sort of background, but the major thing about being an immigrant here was that I lived between the two different cultures of coming from Hong Kong, where we're really from, and a traditional background, and just seeing and learning the ropes of what it's like to live out here. And you hear about immigrants talking about what the greatest things that the parents have done for them, I guess immigrant children, is that they're given greater opportunities, right? That's what people move for. That's what switch countries. That's why they uproot their entire lives. And I don't think it really dawned upon me until I was much older, being able to speak the language and also going back to different parts of the world to see the disparity between the fact that guess what, we're writing code and code is in English, or you're trying to speak the language and you're trying to sell, and everyone looks towards our countries for what to do. So just being on this side of the world definitely has a lot of different advantages. And part of maybe we'll get into this later, but part of leaving school was kind of like an exploration of that, like how could I not do it, is in some ways, or just if I just took a regular 9 to 5, at least at the thought at the time, right?
So you mentioned leaving school. So
Sure.
when did you leave school?
Second year. So it was a bit of a chance encounter because I never planned on being an entrepreneur. Growing up as a kid, I at the time I was competing a lot. So I was I studied Taekwondo since I was maybe like 5 or so.
Okay.
And I competed nationally and was ranked. And then there was one particular trip coming back from Korea Open. I read this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that just sent me on this different path where it's just like, mind your own business, find roles in jobs that you learned a lot. And it just kind of set me the direction of like, here I am, man, disenchanted with school, because I've always found school a little bit slow for me
Yeah.
and bored for me. And later found out as I got older that, oh, it turns out I had ADHD, and that was also kind of like a thing where I just didn't fit with like the regular system. I was a smart kid, right? Straight A's as a kid. I had 2 older brothers that academically were much stronger than me, but it was also one of those things where I wasn't a bad kid, but it just didn't resonate with me. It didn't connect with me as well. And so I was studying fine arts, wanting to be an animator, and I just halfway through just decided that, you know what, I'm going to go roll this on my own, and I could always come back. There was always like a backup plan. But it also helped that I was the third kid because my older brothers already had the degrees, so that conversation with my parents wasn't harder to navigate as it otherwise would have been if I was the first kid. So I think that also played a role as well.
Wow. So yeah, I'm the third child, so there are definitely a lot of advantages, more advantages than disadvantages that come with being the third. So when so Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's a book that I recommend to so many people to read, especially the younger people I meet. I say start with that, and then there's other books that I tell them to get into, Blue Ocean Strategies and building a story brand, other things like that. But Rich Dad Poor Dad is a great one to start with. How did you come upon that book?
A tournament. Sorry, I also on a flight, but I was flying for a national tournament, and a teammate of mine, he was reading it, and I just looked over and it was like, oh, what's this? What are you reading? And what's it about? And he told me about how this book talks about business and he kind of gave me like the brief overview of like cash flow quadrant before I read the book.
Yeah.
But he kind of gave me this idea of like, oh, there's different ways you can think about incomes and what have you. And so when he said that to me, it resonated. And so I picked up the book on my flight back and then read it on a separate trip. So it was nationals of that one tournament, and then it was like Korea Open, both on the same on different flights. But
Wow.
that's how it happened.
So how
Chance
old were you
encounters.
at the time?
I was probably 18 when I first introduced to it, and so I was
Okay.
probably just turned 19 before I decided I was dropping out, because I birthday's in September, and then the tournament was like late August, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so coming back, I was like my last semester was December 2006.
did you work as a child? Did you have jobs? Were you always kind of, because myself, I was always doing something. I had the paper route, then I was trying to fix bikes for the neighborhood kids, trying to, make some money. I was always doing something. Were you kind of like that too?
Kind of, but in my own way. So I had I tutored a lot because my dad ran a tutoring business at home, right?
Oh.
And so that's kind of like how we made money while we're here, that kind of thing. But it always exposed me to chances where people ask me to tutor them math or something like that. And so there was a bit of that. I also had odd jobs. So the longest gig that I had was actually teaching Taekwondo. So my brother, and this is an important, I'm glad that you asked this, because one of the early sort of like work lessons that was instilled in me was don't work for money. And the way that it played out was that my brother, he's 7 years older than me, and so I would have been 13, he would have been 20. At the Taekwondo school that we were at, we had a branch school. It was a community center when we started, but we grew this with the school from 30 students, and then week over week we had new students come in, and we had like 180 students by the time we basically like panned out. But during that time, he brought me to help him, and I was really young. But he made it a point not to pay me. It wasn't a like sort of, but the way that he approached it was like, hey, you wanted to do this so that you could identify if this is something you really wanted to do, as opposed to having sort of external value, dollar amount associated with it. And that was a very early important lesson. My mom didn't agree with it at the time, but I'm like, I like hanging with my brother. I didn't really care. This was kind of a fun thing for me to learn how to teach anyways. And so I just, every Saturdays he would bring me in, and that was kind of like the early start. And afterwards I had different jobs doing tutoring. I had different jobs doing teaching designs and programming for like, back then it was Flash animations. So I would teach like odd classes, but they all gravitated around teaching and learning in some way, shape or form. So as much as I didn't like school, I've always had a background within that kind of field.
No kidding. So I got to ask you only because I recently, in the last few years, started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Sure.
Do you still practice Taekwondo?
I don't. I retired 2012, so it's almost 12 years ago. So it's been a long time.
So what was your pinnacle of your accomplishments in Tai? You said you were doing international tournaments. So what was the pinnacle for you?
Yeah. So I topped out at ranking 7th in Canada for my division. So I trained at a really good school. So my coach was an Olympic coach. My teammates were Olympians. So we're all sort of like in the same sort of path trying to do that. I never made it. I was too far off. But I also had a late start too. I think that was part of the condition, because I think where you started off into kind of things, I had a lot of like things I had to unlearn. But that was basically where I capped out tournament wise. In terms of like ranking wise, my best tournaments, my biggest tournaments were World University Games in 2007. I was represented Team Canada 3 times. One for forms, which is what we call Poomsae, 2006. And in 2007 and 2011, represented Team Canada at World University Games. And
how old were you when you started?
Well, Taekwondo I started when I was 5, but competing wise, I started in 2003, I would say, maybe 2001. Wasn't very serious about it, so I was high school. So it would have been first tournament was juniors, so 2001, and then 2003 was when I got more serious about it. So that was when I was 15.
Okay, so you're doing it for 12 years, before you really start taking it to that next level of saying, all right, I want to compete, and things like that. So you retired from that, you read the book, and then you say, that's it. School's not for me. So did you have a plan, or did you just say, well, here's the beginning of the plan. School's not for me.
No, for sure. I probably had inklings of a plan, because when you think about taking inventory of the skill sets that you have, and that's why if you ask about the early sets of questions about, what kind of early career choices did you have or paths, those things help, because I was good with computers. I grew up with computers. My brothers, were technical and what have you. They were both engineers. And so we always had a computer in the house. And so I probably had an idea that was going to do something around that. And at the time, the internet was becoming a bigger thing. It was getting, I grew up around that kind of thing. And so I learned how to code in high school. And so the first business that I started was freelancing as a web designer. And I remember, sitting in class, just looking at different freelancers or agencies and how they approached it, and just basically doing my own version of it. I know how to deploy and set up a site, how to upload files with FTP, buy my own domain, all that kind of thing. And so it was one of those things where I'll figure it out as I go along, because I've always had a sense of that, where, you know, for me, I had faith in the direction that I was in, largely because I also had other people instill some of that in me. Because when you're young and you're, you know, at the time trying to be better for yourself, a lot of people want to support you. When you come across like an 18-year-old or 19-year-old or 20-year-old and they're like, hey, I want to do X, you don't know where they're going to end up, but you're going to be like, okay, I encourage that. I like where you're going with this. What can I do for you? And I think I had a lot of those kind of people around me, because I kept declaring that's the kind of thing that I wanted.
Yeah, it's huge. Having that support structure is huge. And I'm glad you said that, because I know there's a lot of people who they might have that plan, but they don't declare it. They don't declare it to those around them. So they lose out on the opportunity for help in a lot of those situations. Whenever I see young people who are hustling and they're trying to do something and they declare their goals and their intentions to me and their strategy, I always am the first one to say, hey, how can I help? But if you're not open about that and you don't openly declare it and let everyone, or I would tell people I met in the grocery store what my plans were. I didn't care who, because you never know who you were talking to, and you never knew what their capacity was to help you, or who maybe someone they know. And there was a lot of times I got jobs like that where I would just tell someone, hey, this is my goal, this is my intention, and they would say, hey, you know, I know somebody who owns this company. Let me talk to him. Maybe you might be a good fit. And there was a couple of jobs I got just like that growing up when I was, you know, in the financial world first coming out. So
Yeah.
that is something that is great that you said. I'm glad you said that. You know, sharing your ambitions, sharing your goals, and letting, especially older people who could maybe be more of mentors to you, that could be something that is also important.
No, absolutely. And a lot of it really comes down to just, again, you know, the early experiences that I wouldn't say that I sought out for it. I was lucky that I just happened to be the right place at the right time. Like I didn't condition my brother to like treat me a certain way, or the coach that, you know, like took me in, that kind of thing. And I think a lot of it really came down to the fact that they instilled in me in some way, shape, or form a sense of introspection, of thinking about, what do I want? What is it that I think I want, and why do I want it? And those things were pressed onto me. And you know, you might get that, you know, in your school, where like, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up, that kind of thing. And I think I had a version of that I felt a bit more serious about, because it just seemed like it was important for me. And it also helped because at the time I spent time with people that are older than me, right? By proxy of, you know, hanging out with my brother, or by proxy of like being in a school or environment where I just had people that were older. And it just, you know, when you spend time with older people at that age, what you end up doing is you just start future projecting yourself of where you're going to end up, right? And so you're going to be asking like, oh, do I like this? Do I like this trait about this person that I'm meeting with? Or do I want to like aspire to be like that? Or do I want to move away from that? So you have models and anti-models. And I think that kind of really instilled in me. And again, I don't know how much of it's, you know, my own sort of guidance versus I was just lucky, but you know, it is what it is. And that's how it played out for me.
I'm so glad you said that, because there's definitely people that I saw when I was younger that I noticed. They were older, and I too had a lot of older influences around me. I had older sisters, and I kind of always gravitated, even today in my life as an adult, I still gravitate toward people who are a little bit older, because they're more accomplished. They've been there, they've done it, and I feel like they hold more knowledge. But when I was in my teens, I would see people in their mid-20s, and I noticed the people who definitely were not the people I wanted to be like, not the people I emulated, and I would see people who were in their mid-20s that were really doing great things. And I said, man, this is what I want to be. This guy's over here. He's drinking. He's still partying. He doesn't have his life together. I could see he's on the downward trend of getting out of shape. I noticed those things. So I'm so glad you said that. It's important to notice those, like you said, you know, mentors and anti-mentors. You know, I noticed that a lot too. And I tell people, focus on people you want to emulate and be like, but also it's really important to know what not to do
Yeah.
and what you don't want to be like and who you don't want to be like, and make sure you're, one, not hanging out around those people, but two, don't take advice from those people, because there's a lot of people who take advice from older people, right? Because they're older. It doesn't necessarily mean that's solid advice, or you should be listening to people like them, because if they're not in a place where you would want to be, why would you listen to them?
Absolutely. No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? And so it definitely was one of those things that, when you look back, it made a lot more sense. But at the time, I think another factor that, to your point about looking at the people around me, I also didn't really identify well the people that were my age, right? If you look at the emotional maturity of like high school wasn't a particularly fun experience for me. I had people that had friends, I had people that, but we just didn't connect in the same way. And I think a lot of that just boiled down to me thinking, looking to people and being in a different circle also helped. And so, yeah, those are definitely important early influences that led to the later pivotal moments that were major decisions. So some people might say, oh, that's a very big risk or, courageous thing to do. And it wasn't really like that. It was more like this seems like the least risky thing to do. This seems like it's a risk adjusted bet in making this particular calculated decision. I don't know if calculate is the right word, but it's like it felt more like the right thing to do rather than because I know this is going to play out very well. It's like downsides is this. I can always go back. I can always go take a job. I can always go do whatever else, right? And so it just seems like it was the same environment, and the fact that I also had the support of, again, seeing people that didn't have the same obligations that I had to sort of meet. Those things also helped.
How did your parents feel?
I think like any Asian parents would, right? Or any parents would. It's basically, I'm sure there's anxiety and certain uncertainty around it. My dad was very supportive. My dad was like, you go do your thing. I think what helped navigate that conversation was that at that point I was already fairly serious about my Taekwondo competition. So I would spend, a lot of my weekdays busing to, 2 hours away to the gym to train and practice. And I was fairly committed. I would travel on my own to go to tournaments and things like that nature. So I think those things and just the conversations that I would have with them made them a little bit more assured. But who wouldn't be worried that if your kid's gonna stop going to school, that they're not just gonna screw around in the house and play games, that kind of thing, right? So it's, which I definitely did too, but it's just no, but it's one of those things where it's like that's gonna be part of the decision, right? But you're like, no, like I want to do this. I think this is important. Here's the train of thought. Here's how I'm gonna approach it, and here's my backup plan. And if you just present it like that, I think they're like, okay, I'll support you. And I think that's what it came down to.
Yeah, there's an element of that most people don't understand with Asian parents. My mom being from India and the emphasis on education. I had a moment like that in my world where I left, my path and my school, studying, to become a physician. And I said, I'm going to go in a different direction. And that was probably one of the scariest moments for me, because my mom was not supportive. She holds the line of the typical Asian parent, where is if you don't become a doctor or engineer, you're essentially a disgrace to the family. And, why did I bring you to this country for a better life and better education? So that was something that really hurt her. And it took a long time for me to, come around, her to come around for my decision. So what came next for you? So you made the decision you made the jump, and you said, I'm going to create the landing on the way down. So what did you do next?
Well, what's interesting is that I, when I first started getting into the business, I quickly realized that the technical skills that I had of building web pages and the mechanical skills of building business and getting clients and sales, those are very different things. And so, even just the discipline, the guidance of building your own business was very hard. And so, basically, about a year in, I had while I was in school, I was part of this program where you could work and study at the same time, and then it was like subsidized by the university or the government or what have you. And so the workplace that I was at while I was still studying, they reached out and said, "Hey, we have this opening for this thing. Would you be interested?" And so ironically, as I left my university a year later, I actually ended up taking a full-time job with them. And so in a sense, I kind of shortcutted, like, oh, I didn't need a degree to get a job. And that kind of was the first sort of like marker that, oh, it is going to work out in that kind of in that sense. So ran my freelance business for a while, networked, met a bunch of different people. But about a year in, I went to work at the university, and that was kind of the real solidifying of the technical skills. I went to conferences. I had a regular, like, dedicated set of hours where I was doing customer support, tech support, really, tech support and do web development. And it kind of really gave me a sense of developing my skills. And so for the next 4.5 years, 5 years, I worked at the university, starting from like a junior, doing support work, to leading a lot of their user experience and research design efforts. I set up the first usability lab. I redesigned the different portals of the site, which I think they're still using today. But that was sort of the real sort of like training, I would say, for developing the skills around being a great user experience designer. And I would say that in my career, there's kind of three major arcs, and that was sort of the end of the first one, where I was kind of like working as a designer. The next arc was after I left university. I felt like I was capping out working at a public institution, and I always looked at startups and private companies. I read Paul Graham from Y Combinator about how they think about building businesses. And I took a lot of design inspiration, seeing a lot of the products made a lot more sense than the environment that I was in. And so I started thinking about analytics and tying analytics to design. And that's kind of how I stumbled upon conversion rate optimization, right? Being good at analytics, tying and measuring your designs. And so I consulted for that for a while. And that sort of consultation and that sort of exploration led me to work at a company called Basecamp. They're based in, or 37 Signals actually. They're based in Chicago. They're early pioneers of software as a business, and they're champions of remote work. And so I've read a lot of the works, and I was able to see how they operated firsthand. While I was there, I was lucky again that when they invested, they don't make a lot of investments, but they invested into a local company based in Chicago, which was the first coding bootcamp to ever exist, right? And so now they're a little bit more prevalent now, where you could join a 6 to maybe like a 12-week program, and you go from zero coding experience to being a software developer. And they invested in one of the first ones, and as an employee, I got free tuition. And so through that process, I learned how to write and code and build apps and wrote software. And I think that was like the second sort of major arc where I learned how to write and sold software. And so eventually the job ran its course, and I came back to Vancouver, and I started my first software company, because I was deciding, do I consult again, or do I run a software company, or to try to start something. I wasn't really starting a software company, I should say. I was trying to continue coding on the side to build an app, right? Try to learn how to sell that. And then I quickly found out that teaching yourself how to code and design versus teaching yourself how to write software, very different skill set. And so while I was building the product, we ran out of money a few times. I joined a local coding bootcamp as a TA, with the pitch being, hey, I'm not going to be the best software programmer on your roster, but I know what it's like to be a beginner. So I'll empathize with your students very well. Going back to my teaching experience as I was younger, I eventually became their head instructor. So, being a TA, working my way up. But the real trick for doing that was because I wanted to access their curriculum and learn how to code better. So
there you go.
I became a better software developer through that process, because it's just day in and out. Solve the problems for students, so solve it with them, really. And I just go through the course and curriculum over and over again, and I was like, you know what, this is pretty solid now. Fast forward, software company ran its course in 2016, and at the time I was like, we had a product that people liked, and people loved, but we couldn't figure out user distribution. We didn't have enough users to build enough traction to build a sustainable business. We thought we weren't good enough marketers. And then that entered the third mark of, maybe we should go learn how to teach this, or meet with, at the start it wasn't teaching. At the start was meet with other people that could teach this. So we ran a growth hackers meetup locally, ran monthly events, sought off other speakers and experts in the field, and then consulted on the side. And then that eventually turned into the business that we have today, which is we are a growth marketing agency for e-commerce and SaaS businesses, where we run performance marketing campaigns for paid ads, landing pages, sometimes email, just a full gambit, a full funnel of how to take from first interaction all the way to recurring revenue. And but that's kind of the journey, like the three major arcs, and that's how I kind of wear a lot of different hats and think a lot of problems from a design perspective, from a software and technical perspective, to a marketer's perspective.
It's so incredible because you're you actually truly went from I use this terminology a lot because it resonates with people. You actually were on the ground level doing, for let's say, building a home. You were on the ground level learning the intricate parts of the electrical and the plumbing and trim work and all that stuff, and then you graduated to the next level, which was doing some of the finished work, and then you graduated almost to, well, now you could be the GC. Oh, well, now, and next thing you know, you're graduated to, now I'm the builder. I'm the builder, and now I'm building the houses. But you had that baseline entry level work of, you knew how to do like the basics of pouring the foundation and running electric and plumbing, all the way now to, okay, now I could really run this and really build something great here. And that experience, I don't want to say in the trenches, but you had that experience. So now, obviously, that made you so much better on the tail end because you had that foundation. So tell me a little bit about what you're offering today and how that ties into everything that you learned.
Absolutely. No, and I appreciate you saying that because I think that's an excellent analogy, right? Because I think if you continue that arc, where do you go next? Which is you're buying and selling homes. You're investing and deciding which areas to work in and versus which not. You're evaluating other contractors and all those type of things. But it really did end up being like that. And so going back where we are today is, well, we run marketing campaigns for a lot of different growing brands. Partly because what I noticed was that in order for us to run a growth marketing team or see a lot of different, it's really important to see a lot of patterns. And so e-commerce was a good industry to get into because you can take a lot of the learnings from one side of business, change the product category and go to a different one and see which parts applied, quote unquote, follow best practices versus where it made sense to deviate away from that. And so from an advantage perspective, it really meant that we could think full funnel. A lot of, freelancers or agencies understandably would come from a specialist mindset, and we really lean hard on being a generalist. And that's sometimes talked about in a negative light, but where it really plays really well is being able to translate and think about how each of these touch points transition from one to the next. So we understand full well how a Google Ads campaign is impacted by a landing page versus site optimization and speed optimization to conversion rate optimization. To be able to think on that level, diagnosing problems is really helpful, because when you have an ad campaign, Google Ads, Meta Ads, and something's not working, most people are going to look at conjecture and be like, well, why is this not working? It must be this or it must be that. And they end up solving for the wrong problems. And it's very situational when I talk about it in these broad generalities. But when you actually get into specific problem solving, it really helps a lot. And it's hard to teach and hard to train, but it helps a lot when you're in the trenches actually thinking about, what do you do next? And I think a lot of marketing campaigns, or if you look at marks of good, what I identify as marks of good marketers, is not when things are going well or when things are easy to market products. Those campaigns are definitely going to go well, but it's the ones that are on the cusp of, if you set the right combination of things, or if something goes wrong, what do you do next? The diagnosing is a lot of what really it comes down to, because we all know, a path of building a company from 0 to 1 million is not a straight path. There's a lot of trials and tribulations along the way of, okay, we tried this thing, that didn't make sense, let's move on to the next one. And so I think a lot of the skill set that we bring to the table now when we join teams is navigating that process with them, especially when you hear a lot of the thought processes externally of how founders or marketing directors think about what they should be doing when they should be doing something else.
So when you hit on something there, which I want to go back to, if an ad doesn't work, there's a lot of people, especially in the e-commerce world, as the owner of an e-commerce brand, and I made this mistake early on too. I blame the ad. It must be the ad. It must be just it has to be the content, the creative. But then I remember early on, and if you could speak to this, there was a time where we were looking at an ad. And then we looked at the analytics, and the click-through rate was good. That means the ad was triggering people to click, yet when they landed on the site, they weren't converting. And so we said, okay, so maybe it's the landing page. And then we said, okay, we gotta change up the landing page. And then we changed up the landing page, and it still wasn't converting. We came to find that it was really the UI of the checkout process. that was flawed. But we went through this whole progression of thinking all these things were wrong, but at the end of the day, it was a CRO, right? It was a CRO problem. It had nothing to do with the ads or the creatives or the targeting of the ads. So when you are now, so let's just talk about what you're specializing now. When you enter into situations like that, because whether the people listening right now, whether they're business owners or not, they might even be consumers. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've all see ads. And there's ads we click on, and there's ads we just don't click on. And then when we land somewhere, there are websites we land on after we click, and then we say, yeah, no, and we leave. And then there's websites we land on, and we're like, I'm buying this. And next thing you know, you're buying it. It's already en route to your house. What are some of the biggest breakdowns you see that are happening for e-commerce companies or maybe individuals who are trying to sell something, right? They're a business owner. I got to run ads because if you don't run ads, right, it's either running ads or cold reach out. Those are your two options. What are some of the biggest breakdowns you're seeing for people when it comes to the ads?
The most common way, and it's not just ads, the most common way business owners or marketers really screw up when they're making these type of decisions is they're bastardizing the data that they're given, because data doesn't always tell us the truth, right? Data helps us be less wrong about what we think we're about to do next. And so when you look at the numbers, people are going to look at it very literally and be like, well, click-through rate says this, well, therefore it must be this. And this is where the user experience hat really helped me. When I was doing user research, the data can tell you one thing, but when you actually go through the checkout experience, right, there's quantitative data and then there's qualitative data. When quantitative data tells us things are in absolute terms, I don't always take that at face value. And so it just leads me to start asking other sets of questions to explore before you commit to a particular action or decision. And I think a lot of people make that mistake of taking that number very literally and not recognizing that there could be a randomization in effect. It could be not statistically significant. It could be something qualitative about the ad that is clickbaity and getting people to get to the other side. And then you have to evaluate the ad creative qualitatively and maybe make a gut that you don't necessarily have a number associated with it. There's all kinds of little nuance that is associated with the tools that are available to you. And so that's why, when you look at this work, it's an art and a science, right? The data part, everyone understands. Oh, that's science. There's numbers associated with it. But very few people have actually ran a scientific experiment, right? The last time most of us have approached science or a math class was in high school or university. And so if you actually go back to how mathematicians or people that actually do this type of work and people that do data analysis, how do they actually approach this type of work? I think that's where a lot of people get wrong, because it's one of those things that feels like it's the right thing to do, but it's actually not. And we still run into this problem fairly often when we work with brand owners, where they're setting directions about what they want to do next or what kind of ideas that they would have that are based on this data, thinking that they're data driven or data informed, but when they're really not. They're not necessarily like analyzing data in the right way or setting up the right breakdowns and just making decisions based on that. And it's hard to explain and hard to teach because it's, again, very situational, but that's a common thread. And I'll add one more, because if you look at Facebook ads or any type of ad platform nowadays, a lot of times, before you even look at the numbers, you also have to look at the ad tracking and the lead mechanics, or like the conversion tracking is the events. And so if you're not technical, most marketers aren't technical, they're not developers. And so very few people question whether if the source data is valid at all. And sometimes that's just a matter of, when we audit accounts, you're literally going through a checkout and just watching Facebook and say, hey, did Facebook register that event? When you click add to cart, did it show up? Did it not? When you go to initiate checkout, did it match? You actually have to audit the account to see, oh, these numbers are valid. So when you go back and interpret the data, a week from now or 2 weeks from now, those numbers could be trusted, rather than take those numbers at face value and not question whether if the thing that led to it was even valid in the first place.
Yeah. So it's so funny you say that, because there are so many business owners I meet that they're so locked in on the analytics. They just read the numbers, they read the reports, and they hold it as gospel. The analytics said that this was the click-through rate, this was the open rate, this was, and they just say, hey, this is it. So now there's a problem. So you're looking at it from a more, let me say, zooming out and looking at it from the broad spectrum. What else could it mean? Not just, oh, the number says this, so it must mean this, which is great, which is a lot of things in life you should look at about that. I mean, I talk to people all the time from the standpoint of fitness, and I always tell them, just because the number on the scale is going down, doesn't mean you're getting healthier. You might be losing weight, but that does not mean you're getting healthier. There's a thing called skinny fat, and there's a lot of other things that can go in the wrong direction if the number on the scale is going down. So, as a business owner, I was guilty of that too. I would look at certain numbers and I'd say, well, this means that. Why? Because that's what I was taught. That's why I just was understood that this is what this meant. So when you look at today's landscape as, I don't know, I forget what the number. I look at Shopify analytics all the time, but I also look at Shopify as a whole, as I'm an investor in Shopify. And I forget how many thousand new businesses and storefronts are popping up on Shopify every single day. Just an alarming amount. And the CEO of Shopify and the founder is Canadian as well.
That's right.
So when you see that, what do you do as the owner of your business to help your customers stand out, not only from from an ad standpoint and from a noticing standpoint, but also from conversion? Because literally, the competition is literally growing every single day. And it may not be directly someone competing in my business or my industry or my space, but it's just in general. Every time we go on social media, we are seeing more and more ads. So what do you advise, or what's your strategy, whatever you can share, about why working with someone like, let's say, you would be different, and what you guys are doing to navigate through this time where new businesses and ads are just going rampant?
Sure. I mean, a lot of things comes down to a few fundamentals, right? And so if you think about it from a macro perspective of, hey, here's the ecosystem of Shopify owners and brands and competition that's entering the market. What does it all mean? And do you really have to worry so much about that? The way to think about it is to think about on the consumer side. When you are buying a particular product, do you go through the entire gambit of selection of competitors before you make a product selection? And on which platforms do you do that? So if you're coming from if you're in a category where your customers search for your product, let's say you're in a category that has a keyword associated with it that is easy to search for. You're looking for luggage. I'm looking for shirts or apparel or something like that I could look for. In those cases, then yeah, competition does matter, because when a searcher is looking up your product, they're seeing you and a few other people, but it's limited by the number of real estate on that particular screen. So you're not selecting you and the entire ecosystem, you're just looking at you for that particular set. And so really it comes down to what's the primary method of acquiring customers, and also where have customers found your brand historically. Marketing works best or hiring a marketing team actually works best when you have existing sales. So if you have a history, like a cold start is hard for anyone, because we don't have magic bullets. We don't know what your customers like or don't like. We're not necessarily your customer demographic. But if you showed me your past customers and you told me what they said they liked about it, if I saw your reviews, if I saw the content that they created, why they said, hey, I picked this product over the other ones, generally speaking, what it means is that you can take that same narrative or the same message, right, and what convinced that particular person, and use that at scale. So I think of marketing as sales at scale. And so, said it differently, if I had, and sometimes you can get this from the founder, right? It's like, why should I pick your product over something else? And what are my other options? Why would I select that? And then you walk through the selection process. They're like, well, our product does this, this, and this. And if you got a competing product, you have this advantage. And guess what? If that was a train of thought that you had to buy that product, it means that there's people out there that's going to have the exact same thought process, and they're not going to be looking at everybody. They're just going to evaluate your product and maybe the other category, or they're not even thinking about that at all. They're just thinking of, oh, you solve this problem, I have this problem, where can I sign up? And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And so you're approaching this and asking this question from a business owner macro perspective, but the way to address that is just think about the consumer's perspective. What do they think about when you're on your phone doom scrolling and you see an ad and you're seeing like, oh, I have this product for this offer, this looks pretty cool, you click through and you see the price. Your decision point is, do I want to buy this now or do I come back to it later? Right? Not let me go do an entire research of all the entire things of the ecosystem to see which one's best. Some people shop like that, or for high cost items, they do shop like that, and it's appropriate to do that. But you just have to ask, do I have enough unit economics in the ad platforms to pay a certain price to Meta to get this customer at a certain price and have enough margins left over to run a profitable business? If the answer is yes, how much budget can I deploy to this, continue growing this until this no longer works? That's the game.
Wow. Incredible. I've been through this for years, and I'm learning from what you're saying as well, because it's frustrating. It's frustrating in our space as tactical gear. We have not a huge swath of competitors, but the competitors we do have, obviously they're strong. There's some big players in the game, and we're always looking to see where we can pivot to get that competitive advantage, where we can say they're going to click on our ad and not on their, the competitor's ad. They're going to turn to our gear for our quality and price and all that stuff. I mean, obviously the value needs to be there. Value among it has to be there, and there has to be trust in the brand. We have the trust in the brand, and then we have the value. But if we're still in that process of we want more and more people to notice us, there's still millions upon millions, how many people who don't even know we exist, right? So that's part of the game as well, is expanding that brand noticing and that brand recognition. Obviously, it comes to branding and marketing in other fronts as well as advertising too, but we want to make sure that people, we want to get to the point where people see the logo, they see the F3, the B of 221B, and they say, okay, right, and then we want them to know what it means, right? That this B is a combination of the letter F and the number 3, which is faith, family, freedom. So we want them to know that story. So when you see someone else with that logo walking with a backpack or a shirt, you recognize that. Just like when you see the Under Armour logo on someone's body, it's okay, it's an athletic company, it's an athletic brand. What does it mean? So those are the things that we're still trying to go to and work with. So from because I'm sure people are wondering, so I want to let people know. So when you engage with a company, how does it work? Is there like an intake? Do you kind of interview them to see if they're a right fit for you, and if this is even something a viable option, and see if there's a basis for a relationship? Because I know there's people going to be wondering. We have a lot of business owners that listen to this, and I network with a lot of business owners and other CEOs, e-commerce brands. So how does it work to engage with your company?
No, for sure, and I appreciate you asking that. I mean, it comes down to really, you're right, an interview, and it really comes down to a fit for both sides. Because on one hand, yeah, it's helpful to get the sale and what have you for self-serving gains, but realistically it's not sustainable if you can't actually grow the business. So realistically, what I'm trying to find out when I meet with new brand owners is, can there be a working relationship that basically whatever work that we do for you covers the fees that we can earn more fees and covers our costs? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, of course we should work together. Why wouldn't we want to work together, right? And so a lot of it really comes down to understanding the existing business model. Like, how are things going so far? Have you seen existing sales? Are there margins to support it? And also, are there and also doing an analysis of, based on the sales so far, what has been tried, right, and tested, so that if I see existing ads and I see, oh, you guys made this much money running those ads, you know what, I think we can do better than that. And that gives me more confidence that, this is a good set to engage. And so the best brands and teams to work with us are generally the ones that have weaker marketing in a sense, but a strong set of sales. That's like, quote unquote, the ideal client. And that's historically always been the case for us. The other part that we also look for is enough volume. And so what I mean by volume is, it could be, and generally it's a certain dollar amount, but really it's actually the number of orders that we have seen. Because a lot of ad platforms, Google, Meta, they're going to rely on conversion data in order to inform their machine learning about how to find net new audiences. And so when we look at brands that have high AOV, so when they have a high average order value, sometimes it's very cost prohibitive. So for example, we have worked with brands that have a $1,500 or $2,000 products up on the first bat, and so that means that when you're acquiring customers profitably at $300 to $400, or maybe $600 per acquisition. But if Facebook needs 50 of those conversions in order for them to get out of learning phase, or if Google needs that amount of time, it means that you need 50 conversions times 600 for an ad budget, for an ad set, in order for it to work, to find out if it's going to work. And if it's not, you can't determine reliably leading up to it if the ad creative is the problem or the audience targeting is the problem, or we talked about that earlier. So sometimes it's about navigating, does that historically, how has that made sense? So a large part of it really comes down to finding mutual fit, but it really comes down to evaluating, what kind of creatives have you ran that led to those results, and also what is the account structure, and usually looking at those two things and asking high level figures of your financials in terms of, what is your gross margins, what is the landed cost that you need, and then calculating that against in the ad account to say that, oh, if your gross margins landed from manufacturer to warehouse was a 70%, we reliably know that our ad campaigns need a 2x ROAS within a certain date period in order for us to have profitability. And or if you have a repeat purchase rate of 15%, we know that we could quote unquote break even on the first purchase, but reliably know that within 90 days we have a second or third follow-up sale available to you because you have the SKU combination for it. A lot of different ways to approach that type of problem, but it generally falls down to a few sort of like high-level things like that.
That's incredible. That's awesome. I want to jump back to where you are now.
Sure.
So you acquired this through this serendipity, if you would, acquiring this knowledge to get to where you are. You have this great successful business where what a great business. You're helping other business owners, enhance and grow their businesses. What's something you would tell to someone who maybe is young entrepreneur who is maybe thinking about making a leap and a decision like you made to get to where you are today? What's one thing that you would share with them that would, I don't want to say fast track, because that's not necessarily what you want, because there was value in the path that you took and it wasn't fast by any means.
Of course.
But what's something that you would share with them to get to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that I really got right early on that I don't regret, and I would tell other people to do exactly the same thing, which is kind of the going back to the original story of like getting into business. Focus on skills and keep learning on skills that brings value. And so, for example, we're in the business of growing other people's businesses because you can't go broke being able to help someone make $1 million. Right? It's like if you have the skill sets around how to make other people millions, you just have to figure out a pricing model that can take a subset of that. And there's a lot of companies and a lot of opportunities out there for you to have these type of problems to solve, which is why the other part that is related to bringing value to these organizations is building the skill sets around it. I don't think my career path is a very useful career path for a lot of other people, of switching arcs and things like that. But the common thread behind all of these is I was relentless about learning. I was lucky that I was in a teaching environment a lot, because teaching and learning are basically both sides of the same coin. So I was really good at teaching myself a lot of different skill sets, including knowing when I was running into limits that I can't Google for this thing, or I can't teach myself this thing through some course or something like that. I had to do some sort of like weird transition where I had to go teach this thing in a formalized environment enough times before I actually got good at it, that kind of thing. But the core idea was, be relentless with the things that you're learning, and always tie that towards the core idea of delivering value to other organizations and businesses, because I think over time you'll be able to do very well for other people and in time for yourself.
Yeah, and they're going to share that. You help enough people, especially in our space, the e-com and the business space. We're going to share it. I know that I go to other business owners in my space and out of my space for advice on people who they've used that have worked to help grow their brands, and vice versa. People come to me all the time. They're like, hey, who did you use for ad creatives? Who are you using for, Google ads? Who worked out? What did they do? So that's so true. And what a great point. You're not in the business of selling products per se. You're saying, hey, if you have a business and you need help, we're going to help you grow it and scale it. And I want to say it's almost like you have an unlimited inventory of people to go after and help and take care of. But that's what a great thing to be in, a great space to be in. So I know there's going to be people who will message me and say, well, how do I get in touch with this guy? So and obviously, right, you said it's kind of an interview process to see if there's a basis for a relationship. So for any of the business owners listening, whether they're young entrepreneurs or established entrepreneurs, they're looking to grow, scale. What's the best way to reach out to you?
The best avenue is probably through our website. 2x.agency is the site. You can book a call with me. You can reach out to me directly through email. So john@2xcd.com, the number 2xcd.com. Find me on LinkedIn. There's a lot of John Chans out there, but you should probably be able to find me for John Chan under 2x, or on Twitter. I'm also active on Twitter as well. So either one of those channels, and I'm sure you'll have these in your show notes, would be a good way to reach out to me. And it doesn't matter if you're looking to engage in business or not. If you just have questions about wanting to start a business, I know how hard it was for me to get started, so I'm happy to chat about sort of business things as well.
That's incredible. Yeah, and because I wanted to go back to touch on that. Obviously, the premise of the show, Tactical Ambitions. What were your tactical moves and your strategies to get to where you are today? And I speak to so many great people who have this great path and this journey and the strategic moves they made to get where they are. But then ultimately what they're offering now is also valuable to, the path they took is valuable, but then what you're offering now for business owners is incredible and incredible value as well. So I want to make sure people, and I'm glad you said that, because people will get value on multiple fronts in reaching out with you and connecting and, growing their network, and you ultimately, hopefully growing your network too. So John, man, thank you so much. This was so awesome. I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to get all your info from you. I'm going to put all that down below. That way everyone has it. And this is great. I love talking to young guys and entrepreneurs that are really, putting a dent in the world and making things happen. So thank you so much for your time, for coming on.
Likewise, this was a very fun chat for me, so I appreciate you having me on too. So
awesome. Great. I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Likewise. Cheers.